Hi, welcome to the State of the Nation webinar. I'm Michael Sham, and today we've got a very exciting guest. And we know that because so many people have been interested in hearing from the one, the only, Mr. Gigi Alcock. Gigi, welcome.
Thank you.
To the State of the Nation. And let's kick off by telling us a brief Gigi Alcock story. How you're famous for your books, KasiNomics, and some of the works you've done there. Can we start in an interesting place? Tell us about your very interesting upbringing.
Sure. So my parents were political activists and community workers and anti-apartheid activists, and they believed that the best way to kind of help and work with people was to live like them. So my father had been quite a rich landowner, gave everything away, and built a mud hut in the middle of a place called Msinga. And Msinga they chose, in essence, more complicated than that, but in essence they chose it because it was the poorest, most arid place in South Africa, and at the time one of the most violent parts of South Africa. And Msinga's in the Tugela Valley, often says right next door to Ngandla, so that'll place it. And it was kind of the center of where people had been forcefully removed from white farms and other areas into Msinga. So it was kind of really rough place. It's still today officially the poorest district in South Africa, so not a lot has changed. And yeah, they built this mud hut, and my mother taught us at home. We washed in the Tugela River. Our kitchen was a gas cylinder under an acacia tree. It's still my mother's kitchen today. She hasn't upgraded. And basically we grew up herding goats, hunting in the mountains, stick fighting. And those were the kind of skills that we were taught that we learned as kids. We were fluent in Zulu. In fact, we spoke Zulu first, and so in many ways we like when we spoke English, my mother used to struggle because we had an African accent, and she was a journalist and she was teaching us English and hated the fact we spoke like that. So the fact that we improved is purely my mother trying to get us. So we grew up, really understanding and really in part of the culture. If there was a wedding or whatever, we were part of that. We were, in a sense, kind of almost regimented like the local boys were within kind of the age groups. And stick fighting determined who you were. And that was, like we were basically as poor, as brown, and had as much fun as the local Zulu kids.
And embraced by the community. There was no animosity. Were you some kind of sideshow almost?
Yeah. So my parents were seen as leaders, and they were representing people, and they were fighting the government and stuff like that. So they were seen as a source of help and stuff. But us as kids, we were just part of the community. So if we caused trouble, we were whipped by the guys. The fact that we were white was irrelevant. And I would really say that even as a young man later on, we were seen as part of, in essence, a tribal community. And because my father forced us to respect those, and we were disciplined like other Zulu kids were. There was nothing that we were different or anything like that. So we were really part of the community, and in many ways, that kind of shaped me today, that we were completely invisible as a white person. I've always felt this ability to move between worlds seamlessly. I could be in a white environment and people don't even know I can speak Zulu, and the next day I'm in a township or in a rural area, and within a few minutes, people have forgotten this kind of thing. So there's a huge value of the fact that we weren't just speaking the language, we were completely immersed, we were properly part of it. My mother is still part of that community. She's really seen as an intimate part of it, not as a helper or someone, at the mission station over there, but just another person in a mud hut.
Yes, but able to understand what the greater picture entailed, looked like.
Yeah, and we were brought up, so we were brought up incredibly politically aware. My mother taught us at home and gave us a very good education until we were forced to go to high school in a white school. But the biggest thing is that we were brought up very aware of this. My parents were very politically active, and so that kind of carried through. And I became a political activist after school. I couldn't afford to go to university, so yeah, that's what I ended up using. In fact, my father said to me, I said to my father when I was my teens, I said, will you send me to university? And he said, I cannot afford to send you to university, but I'll prepare you for life in Africa. And I think that was a very powerful thing.
Yes. Now, life in Africa, of course, to many people joining us today, life in Africa means different things to different people, right? To your average sort of white person watching us today has probably never spent a lot of time in a black area, especially a township area. Their interactions have been in what you would call formerly white areas or cities.
Yeah.
Right. You managed to put that understanding of the culture, the community, rolling forward to starting to do business in the townships. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing about that space is that there's these massive misconceptions that because it's informal or out of sight, that it's unstructured, it's unsophisticated, there's very little economic activity, and yet it's a thriving space. And I was lucky enough to realize that relatively early. I mean, I was in essence a socialist at the time, and ended up becoming a capitalist, I guess. I realized at a certain point.
You're not alone, right? We've seen our communists in South Africa become the best capitalists in the world, right?
So I realized there was no glory in poverty. And I also realized that in my work as a community worker, and afterwards I was kind of involved in community work, mainly land rights and community development, that people were never going to be elevated out of this. Black people were not going to be elevated out of this through community work, charity, this kind of stuff. And that the real opportunity was in kind of business. And then my first foray into business is I moved to Johannesburg and I started a telephone business. Well, I didn't start the business. I helped a group of people in Yeoville who wanted to access townships. So I could put these telephones, public telephones, with a little meter on it, so you paid per unit. I put them in Alexandra Madala Hostel, which was like a no-go area. No one went there. The army didn't go there. The police didn't go there. And I had my homeboys from Msinga, so I'd phone them or contact them or phone home and find out where was Mtumseni. He's there. Then I'd go there. And the same in Jeppe Hostel in downtown Joburg, which was kind of where Johnny Clegg initially started singing and dancing and stick fighting. And I had these phones in Smoking Joe's restaurant, which wasn't a restaurant, it was a shebeen in a Jeppe Hostel and in Soweto and stuff like that. And actually did relatively well out of this kind of fledgling business, and kind of realized that one of the things was about people couldn't access these spaces, particularly corporates. There was no understanding of how you could go. There's fear about it at the time. I'm talking now the early 90s. There wasn't even a signpost that said Soweto, so people couldn't access these places. And yet at the same time, the people in those places wanted to do stuff. They wanted to phone home. They wanted to, and so that kind of really started this business journey that I took.
So now, if one rolls back, I presume what you're talking about is something that I experienced in a different life, where you would leave Joburg with its billboards and its franchises and supermarkets and shopping centers.
Yeah.
Drive into the township, and there was no advertising, no formal stores, right? A little bit something that had been built 50 years prior.
Yeah.
But nothing that suited the scale of the population that was there. This is the era you're talking about.
Absolutely. You know, when so initially I went to Soweto in kind of 86, 7. That's another story. I was with an entity called the Wilgespreid Fellowship Center, which was also an anti-apartheid entity. And we'd go into Soweto, and the smog in the winter, the smog was a meter above the ground because, of course, everyone had what they call welcome Dover, those beautiful coal stoves. There was, of course, no traffic. All the roads were gravel roads. And, there was a police or army roadblock at most of the entrances, at New Canada, at Dobsonville, at Diepkloof, which were probably the kind of 3 main entrances you could come into. And, of course, today it's a transformed place. And we've, in many cases, haven't realized how fast and how amazing that space has changed. But at the time I was there, spaza shops was an invisible economy. Spaza, in essence, means a hidden or out of sight shop. And it was shebeens, which were illegal shebeens. It was spaza shops, which are illegal. Even hawkers weren't allowed. And yet at the same time, this invisible economy was thriving and was setting up what has become what it is today. I mean, the taxi industry, they used to have those they used to call them inkomo ziyophuza, which means a cow going to drink, because the original highest taxis kind of gazed down,
yes,
like a cow drinking water. And those were very informal, and that was a kind of start of all of this kind of stuff, but very hidden, very illegal from a government perspective. And people expected that they would leave those places and go and shop outside. And equally in the rural areas as well, you had these large trading stores, but outside of that, nothing. And the trading store sold everything from a plow to a pair of shoes and toothpaste. Yeah.
Yeah. So you then started to do more and more work within the township. That led to marketing and product development within.
Yeah, so I started a business called Mina Nawe Marketing with two colleagues, Guy Sandile Busani and Jablani Pagati, and another. And basically there's a story before that, but the long and short of it is that we saw the opportunity to do marketing in the townships for people like the Unilevers of the world and so on. And at the time, no one believed there was a market in the townships. It seems absurd now. I'm talking 1994, even 5, maybe, around then. And no one really saw this opportunity. We saw the opportunity. And we believed there was a lot of economic activity and so on. And when we were going to clients and saying, hey, we can help you market in the townships, they're like, well, why would we want to market in the townships? So that forced us to try and understand more of the economics of it. How were people shopping? Where were the businesses like a spaza shop or a fast food outlet, whatever it might be? And we invested a lot of our time understanding those dynamics so we could go to clients and say to them, hey, there's however many thousand spaza shops in Soweto and Soshanguve, Mdantsane, whatever. Oh, there's so many fast food outlets and how many schools there are, and the school kids, what are they doing? They're buying snacks and knickknacks or whatever it might be. So when we did that, and that became the basis of my book, because what we've developed is kind of intellectual capital to convince people to please spend money on this market became what was then KasiNomics and KasiNomic Revolution.
I remember quite clearly, and it's South Africa, we are bad rememberers, I always think. I remember the big almost controversy as the Nelson Mandela administration used it almost as a stick to beat business to say, why are you not building shopping centers in the black areas? And it sounds almost crazy now but if you roll back to 1995, 96 even, there were no shopping centers outside of the formerly white areas.
You can probably go to even 2000 and even 2004, because while you might have had in like high profile townships like a place like Umlazi or a place like Soweto particularly, and you often ask people about townships. There's 530 townships in South Africa plus, Depends how you define a township today. And you know, people still, you're like, what's a township? Khayelitsha, Soweto, you know, Mlazi.
Yes.
And and that was what we discovered at the time. But yeah, you're 100% right. There was quite a lag before people started entering that space. Politicians and business people were saying, you know, we need to get shopping things and services and retail and whatever closer to people. Of course, now it's a very different space. Yeah.
And of course, it's created its own controversy because that must have affected the local business.
Yeah.
Which sort of brings, which in a way exacerbated the problem, and there was of white businesses dominating, and the pie being held by these very big, quite slick operators compared to.
So we saw that particularly with the spaza sector, and what in essence happened was that when the shopping centres, but also the formal retailers, moved into the townships. And really start focusing on that. That really destroyed the South African-owned spaza sector. You know, the spaza couldn't really compete with a ShopRite or There or a Score, which was pre-Pick n Pay, took them over. They couldn't compete with those stores. And so that really killed the spaza sector outside of being an emergency shop. And of course, the Somalis and Pakistanis and Ethiopians in particular started arriving, and they revived that spaza sector, which is now, you know, kind of, so it went through a dip and revived. And the same happened, you know, the KFCs moved in and stuff like that, and the township fast food sector, which is a 90 billion rand, 50,000 outlet sector, you know, was hammered by people wanted to go and get a KFC and not get a Gota. But I mean, the fascinating thing is that happened, this cycle has happened, and now the opposite side of it is that that sector is now kind of almost been much stronger and revived and resilient, and now really competing with the formal sector across practically any sector you want to call it: retail, fast food, auto, and so on. So I mean, it just points to the resilience of that sector. But we have been through that, and I think the mistake often made is that there's assumption that township people are not born entrepreneurs, that they actually want to get a job at a ShopRite or at a whatever. And the reality is actually the vast proportion of people, you know, and I have this people saying, you know, our South African people are not entrepreneurs. Absolute rubbish. I mean, I grew up, Msinga was the center of the Dagga trade in South Africa. That's where Durban poison came from. And I wrote about it in my book because it's an extraordinary economic success story. In Msinga, you have thousands of bakkies, hundreds, you know, a couple of thousand bakkies. And when you ask those people, what are you doing with the bakkie? They say, "Sithengisa some benjies," which means we sell peaches. So there's not a single peach tree in Msinga. And they're just running this business, you know. So my thing is that, you know, yes, there's a place for a formal job and that kind of thing. But the reality is that a lot of people want to start their own hustle, if you want, or small business or a little entrepreneur kind of thing. And there's a space we haven't really explored. And that's where the real dynamism of the sector. And people are actually much more entrepreneurs than we realize.
Yeah. Now, we'll get on to the politics of that in a minute, because it's something that I feel extremely strongly about.
Yeah.
But I was listening to some of your recent statements where you say some of our formal data is not being captured correctly. Things like unemployment, the size of this economy.
Yeah.
You know, it remains almost hidden from Stats SA or whoever it is, and certainly the financial media. And you know, some of the people joining us today need some good news, and in a way, this is the hidden good news, isn't it?
So absolutely, and you know what, we have an incredibly optimistic, positive story, and it's driven by that space which we don't know. So let's just look at unemployment. Unemployment figures are absolute rubbish on all sorts of levels, and I could go into detail around it. Real unemployment is closer to 10 to 12%. If we take the word formal and put it in front of the word unemployment, those figures are correct. If we consider unemployment, other forms of income, so for argument's sake, the backroom rental sector is worth 20 billion rand a year in incomes. If I went to someone who was unemployed and really unemployed, and I said to them, do you have a job? They're going to say no. If I said to them, well, how do you make a living? And they said, well, I actually rent out 3 back rooms for 10,000 rand a month. They're 100% right. They're not employed because they don't have a pay slip, but they're renting out a back room. That's a 20 billion rand. The spaza sector pays 25 billion rand a year in rental to South African households. So add that to the 20 billion rand. There's 150 billion rand spaza sector across 100,000 outlets. There's a 90 billion rand fast food sector. The taxi industry, we all know and love them. That's a 50 billion rand a year sector. The muti sector, traditional herbal medicine, plant kind of based medicine, is an 18 billion rand a year sector. And there's an auto sector of 80,000 plus outlets, Gussie mechanics, panel beaters. So I could carry on and on and on. Parallel to that, we have a dramatic change in formality in townships. So I often throw this thing out where I show a picture of shacks and I say, what percentage of households in South Africa are informal? And people say, in essence, shacks. And people say 80%, 70%. Well, the figure according to South African General Household Survey is about 12%. The highest figure I've seen is 20%. These are not my figures. But anyway, so we're saying 80% to almost 90% of households in South Africa are a formal household. Brick block house with a roof and so on.
Structure.
There's incredible change. The townships, as you would know, when you were visiting Soweto in your previous life, were rows and rows of four-room houses. You practically will not find a four-room house in any township in South Africa today. Those are mansions, they're suburban houses and so on. That transformation of now 80% formal or 86% formal has been driven by no home loans, no form of credit whatsoever. That has been money that has been generated in these communities. And these townships have become suburbs based on money generated organically within this kind of space. Then the other factor I throw out is that 25% of our households in South Africa are one-person households, and another 50% of households are between 3 to 4 people. So the vast proportion of people in South Africa live in townships and live in a formal house and are a small household, contrary to the perception of large households and stuff like that. Yes, 12% informal is terrible. And of course people are under budget stresses, but so are the people in Sandton complaining about the fuel price. So we've actually got this thriving economy. We've actually got townships which are in essence, to the large extent, comfortable, formal environments, people investing in fridges and TVs and planting roses in the little garden in front of their house and so on and so forth. And so the majority, we actually have a really good news story. And that sector is growing dramatically. The townships are formalizing rapidly. There's incredible hardware construction, township building sector thriving in that space. I mean, hair salons is another sector, almost 60,000 physical structures and about 40,000 stylists and street sellers of hair care or barbers.
To be fair, they're not making a lot of money out of you and I.
Not at all. Can you believe? I know a lot about the hair care industry despite it. So that's a 10 billion rand a year sector in styling and so on. What is the biggest, I read a lovely article the other day. What's the most stolen, hijacked product in South Africa, South African ports and South African transport routes? Is hair extensions.
Okay.
Now, we're not having people stealing food.
Yeah.
Hair extensions.
Yeah.
The hair sector has blossomed throughout COVID.
Yeah.
And these are just indicators. What's the first job black unemployed youth in the townships start? If they don't have a job, what's the first thing that they start as a job?
I'm going to go with the hair.
Car wash.
Car wash, right.
Now, isn't that an amazing thing? That the first thing, every street corner has a car wash with some unemployed youth washing cars there. Now, that is an indicator. We have 10 million unfinanced vehicles on our roads. When I was in Soweto in those 80s and early 90s, there were no private cars, there were no traffic jams, there were no car washes. Today, there's traffic jams. You go right now to Soweto or any of the townships around the country, the traffic jams are far worse than anything you're finding in the suburbs. And so there's a large number of cars. A car wash tells you that there's a large number of motor vehicles that people are using for pleasure. They want to look good. They want to polish the wheels and have cool rims and a nice sound system. If you go to Lagos, there's no car washes because people are using their cars for transport, for loading things and stuff like that. These are all things that point to the fact that actually we're in a far better situation, and you know, that there has been a real transformation in the sector, and that transformation has been driven by grassroots people making incomes, doing a hustle, and investing that in their communities.
So now, let's stick with that word transformation, because I think in its proper, you know, transformation is a word that has its own meaning in South Africa, but let's use it in its proper context. There's somebody here who's not being transformed, right? And it surely cannot be the businesses. I mean, if we take the classic bellwether for this kind of thing has traditionally been SA breweries, right? They got it from way back, and they weren't scared to stock up the local tavern, shebeen, call it what you will, even if it was one guy with a structure, whatever.
A crate on a donkey.
And the next thing, there arrived beer and it was served cold to the patrons, right? So business gets it. I don't think that, you talk about construction. I don't think that the construction supply industry is unaware of the building, right? So formal business, as we understand it, largely, by and large, gets it. It seems to me that there's only one space in the country that remains untransformed, and that's our government, that don't seem to understand or are willfully ignorant of what's going on.
So, look, I think you're right. I think that the formal sector, corporate businesses, in a way, see the opportunity. Whether they realize the opportunity is not always true. But I think that I think you're right. They realize it. And I mean, as an example, Pick n Pay announced the other day that they thought that the retail sector is going to grow by 200 billion. It's currently around, call it 600 billion. It's going to grow by 200 billion rand in the lower income market. They're right. I mean, how they got to that figure, I don't know, but I would agree with them that it's going to grow, and that's going to grow by 200 billion in a 600 billion rand sector. And if that's true, which as I said, I believe it's true, where's the money coming from if we've got 40% unemployment and inequality and all this rubbish? But to go back to your point, so I believe that the problem with government is that they do not. That there's a number of factors. The one factor is that the ANC wants to have people employed in jobs where they belong to unions and then vote for the ANC. I mean, I'm simplifying it, but to a large extent that is true. They do not understand the concept. Their roots are in socialism, Stalinist kind of build factories and get workers there making widgets and so on. And you can hear it in all of their talk. I mean, the first time Cyril Ramaphosa or any of the government guys spoke about the informal economy was over COVID. Oh, we've also got to do something. But it's lip service. Up until then, it's about we're going to create 1 million jobs. Where are they going to create those 1 million jobs? They want to create them in the formal sector, where people, black people, township people, are going to go and work somewhere and get a pay slip. They don't get the concept of entrepreneurs. They don't get the concept of small and medium businesses.
It feels like they're terrified.
It's not in their DNA to understand that. And when they hear informal, a modern economy with Ubers and Airbnbs and Gasi, fast food outlets and spazarettes, as I call them, these supermarket type spazas, they don't get that. They don't understand it, and they don't know how to harness it. And so when they don't know how to harness it, they know how to harness, a corporate business. They can go there and wag their finger and say, why don't you have a better rating on this or that spectrum? But here they don't, and I believe a lot of those entrepreneurs in the township have written off the government, they've written off the ANC or whoever political party, not just the ANC, and they've said, I'm just carrying on with my business here. I'm making money. I've built this beautiful house. I've furnished this house, and I'm just carrying on. And there's a really big part of our society. You see it in the voting, but I see it in other factors where people, you know, the Department of Small Business Development gave out this, I think, 750 million rand fund where they would give spaza, South African spaza shop owners 10, and then later another amount of money, 10,000 rand, whatever. If they applied and they were registered for CIPC. They've had no one apply. I mean, it's ridiculous. I think they wanted 100,000, they've had 10 or 15,000. So the South African guys aren't racing off to the small development guys to get their 10,000 rand, which tells you, A, you know, the thing has been structured wrong, but more importantly, they're like, you know what, we don't need you. You're not helping us where we really need help. We're just going to carry on. And that is an amazing dynamic where we've actually got these people who are, and I don't like calling it the informal economy. I don't even like calling it the township economy. I mean, I called my book KasiNomics to break away from the term informal. I call them independent businesses. And they're independent, not in the sense that they're not part of a chain or something. These are people who are independently minded, who, you know, as I said, they're just carrying on with their lives. And if you ask those businesses, what do you need? They want to grow their businesses. They're looking to finance the business so that they can extend it. Why have the Somalis been so successful in South Africa? They've capitalized their businesses by pooling money. South Africans operate on a much more individualist basis, and so they use a stokvel often and stuff like that. But why haven't we built financing systems, or the government even done it, where we can, you know, help these businesses? I know a bunch of guys. No guy's got a bakery in Soweto, desperately trying to get funding. He's been hammered. His business was going really, really well. Guess who's hammering him? Eskom. You got a bakery, you need power to bake your bread. And you know, he's a young township Soweto guy, and he can't get funding to help his business. And he's knocked on all these doors because he doesn't fit this kind of image. He's got a bakery and he's employed, I think, 20 plus people and so on. So those people have kind of said no, and the government on the other side have got no clue and either no clue or no intent really to engage and support these businesses. And you know, Ramaphosa has started the presidential youth employment program. What is the youth employment program? Let's take those guys and put them at a formal business as an intern. This is an economy that's shredding jobs. You're going to put them in a form, you know, and not like, how do we create more small businesses? Yeah. And not create small businesses. They're there.
They're there.
How do we support them?
Now, it's interesting. You know, for years I've been sort of, it struck me because as we've grown the state of the nation and we've done more and more work in the political and economic space, the more formal stuff, and I'm sort of obsessed with this kind of thing. And it seems to me that the government seems to only think that two things exist. Big formal businesses that have got HR departments and spaza shops, right? And they use the spaza shop as if that's the end of the sentence. Yeah. Right? It's a one room selling 10 items and that's it.
Yeah, 100%.
They don't seem to grasp that it's a bit more complex and a bit more interesting than that. And also, especially under our sort of ANC kind of quasi-communist wannabe government, they are not interested in growing the economy, they're interested in growing dependence on themselves, right? Because that seems to be an easier stick.
Yeah, so look, the social grants and stuff, I want to say there's two parts of it. The one is that I think it has been a really positive impact, and it has actually grown the Kasi economy, the informal economy, as it were, because people, rather than taking a taxi who's got a social grant, they're managing their budget, they rather buy closer to home. That's another whole discussion, but you know, it's clearly one of the largest sticks in the ANC's kind of stick fighting arsenal is really about the fact that everyone else won't give you a social grant. We're the only ones who'll do it. But let's go to your thing about spazas. You're 100% correct. They have no concept that this is a multi-sectorial sector. their mind is that the informal economy, the township economy, is rows and rows of spazas. They cannot consider rental as an economy. They cannot consider Gasi auto sector, panel beaters and mechanics. They cannot understand the fast food sector, what I call Gasi core sector.
Or growing into bakeries, which is quite a formal operation.
Absolutely. They cannot get their minds around that. And I was involved with Business for South Africa during COVID, and kind of focusing on the SMME kind of small business sector. And in my role there, I got the stuff from small business development saying, we're going to help spaza shops in South Africa with this 700 odd million thing. I was like, what about bakeries? What about this? Oh, no, we'll do that separately. This is the focus of our thing. And then I get things like, and I've had, I was misquoted by one of the political parties, the ATM, and Africa Check went and showed it was I was misquoted and my figures were used wrong. But this guy in Parliament said to Cyril Ramaphosa, the informal economy is 80% is 80% foreigners. What are you going to do about it? When he was asked where he got the figures from, he quoted me, and I'd said 80% of the spaza sector is foreign immigrants, not necessarily legal, but foreign. And of course, the fast food sector is 100% South African. The backroom rental and the spaza rental, that 45 odd billion rand, those are South African people who own their houses. That's 100% South African. But because this concept of spaza shops, and then we say, okay, well, the foreigners are stealing our jobs because they're now in the spaza sector, and we ignore the fact that, hey, look how good the South Africans are. There's 45,000 licensed shebeens and taverns in South Africa, owned by South Africans.
Yeah. You've got, it's interesting where South Africa seems to not want to learn from the rest of the world, but you've got a similar thing in Britain and even in America to a large degree.
Yeah.
I spent a couple of years in Britain, and their small retail sector, let's call it that, your corner store, your garage shop, where it's a different economy, well established for many generations. That used to be, if you could get into your time machine and go back to 1960, it was 100% white.
Yeah.
Now it's 100% not white.
Yeah.
In what is ostensibly a white country. So all of those stores are run by immigrant Indian, Pakistani, first, second generation, etc. And those white store owners weren't put out of their houses. They've moved on to other businesses. Perhaps they rent out the store as opposed to running the store. Yeah. Life moves on, and often I come from immigrant stock, and that is exactly what we did. My parents came to the country unable to speak English. They went into food retail, right, in Johannesburg, sold, fish and chips.
Well, you're so right, and let me tell you, I can take this mirror image and translate it practically anywhere in the Western world, in terms of dynamics of small businesses and stuff like that. There's a lot of similarities. But let's just go back to the South Africa.
Just to interrupt it, the same thing even happens in the East. If you go to Thailand, there, if you go into many of their small retail stores, these are being run by Burmese and Laotians.
In Zambia, it's Burundians and so on. I laughed. I went to Lagos on some work stuff, and I loved Lagos. I mean, you talk about informal economy professors; those guys have it. And I was chatting to a lady who runs a really good business there, and she said, "Where are you from?" I was like, "Johannesburg." She says, she says, "That's a scary place." So I say, well, that's what people say about, Nigeria. I said, and the Nigerians, everyone's afraid of the Nigerians in South Africa. They're involved. And she says, yeah. She says, we only sent you the bad ones. She says, Nigerians are different. But so, we got the bad ones, she said. But I just want to, look at that, at that kind of immigrant thing as well, because we're so often short-sighted about looking at the role those guys play. So, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't be legal and so on. And many of those Somalis particularly have a South African ID and based on refugee status, it's a non-voting ID. They have a driver's license and so on and so forth. So they have some form of legality. And many of the what I call spazaret supermarket type outlets actually have some form of municipal permit, whatever it may be required. So you can't put a blanket thing across them. One of the things we don't take into account is that, you know, this 25 million I mentioned in rental for spaza, 25 billion. Now, do you know how many South African spaza owners sat there, tried to run that business, lost money? A Somali arrived, said, "Can I rent your place?" And he was like, "Sure, you can carry on." Who's now sitting, earning between 7.5 and 25 up to 50,000 rand for renting that house out. That guy's quite happy. He's a landlord.
Yes.
You know, we should consider that's a great thing. And if you want, bring in a rule that says this is the minimum rental value, so the Somali doesn't rip off the South African if you have a concern about that. But recognize that. Recognize the fact that Somali is providing, in walking distance, a social grant recipient, a pensioner, doesn't have to pay a taxi, 15 Rand to go to the shopping, to the formal retailer, and 15 Rand back of their 500 Rand odd that they earn in a child grant. They can now walk down the road and get the same product, coop baked beans as an example, at the spaza at the same price they would get it at the ShopRite. So there's real value there, and across the board, you know, we need to look at the value adds that the sector brings in. I mean, I often get asked about tax, you know, so like, these guys don't pay tax. So I kind of have a number of things around it, but one of the primary ones, they all pay VAT and they don't claim VAT. So there's a 15% net benefit to the fiscus of that. And there's other things, of course. They create massive demand. If you look at the fruit and veg market, I'm sure the Lebanese know, like the Portuguese, a lot about that. I mean, the Joburg fresh produce market is a 7 billion Rand a year business, of which, you know, they have 60% of those people buying at that market are informal or township businesses. And in the first 2 days of lockdown, the government refused for informal traders to go to the market. It was closed to them. And in those 2 days, the Joburg fresh produce market lost 40% of their turnover. Now that just gives you an idea of how powerful this sector is in terms of creating demand from the agricultural sector. Without that sector, when the riots happened in KZN as example, the informal traders were still supplying vegetables in the townships when the ShopRites and so on were unable to supply that. So you know, we need to recognize the power of this. And then the most important thing for me is this, is that if we genuinely had 40% unemployment, if that was true, if that was like people had no other form of income, in essence 1 in 2 people had that, the riots in July would have been Mickey Mouse. This country would be on fire. We would not be sitting here. The fact that informal economy is feeding people, helping buy cars that they're taking to the car wash, going to the Shisanyama, shopping at the spaza, and building those houses that are described, means that we have transformed our society through informal incomes to a large extent to becoming a middle-class society.
Yeah. Or if the 40% was the correct number, we'd have people literally dying of hunger in the streets.
Absolutely. And you wouldn't have electricity and fuel riots that we had in Tembisa yesterday. In Mozambique, the biggest riots they've ever had is when they increased the price of wheat, of flour, because it's a bread driven. That's when they had the riots, not because of electricity. We have to look at some of those things and recognize, you know, that you know, there's higher expectations in South Africa because in essence we have a higher income level, and a higher level of formality and so on. But that sector, you know, I spoke to a room full of business people at an award ceremony, and I turned to this audience, and it was primarily black, very, very well-off people, and I said, how many of you here were brought up, sent to school, and fed by a goko who was selling fed cook on the street corner, or a, you know, father who owned a little spaza shop? and they put you where you are today, and you've forgotten them. And that's the tragedy. We've forgotten to look at that sector, and that sector is actually the opportunity of economic transformation in our country.
Well, Gigi, just in wrapping up, maybe it's a godsend that they've been forgotten about, because it's allowed them to grow without government interference.
Yeah.
It's allowed them to grow without big companies eating their lunch, as it were. And just in conclusion, would you say it's a fair statement to say that South Africa is in no way in as bad a shape as what we are being fed by the media and the state?
100% not. I mean, I saw a headline the other day which said 20% of South African households live in informal dwellings. Why is the headline not 80% of households live in formal dwellings? This is the mistake we make. And I just want to say, I don't say there aren't poor people. I don't say there aren't problems. There's issues like crime. There's issues like, you know, certain things like Eskom and so on and so forth. But actually, the vast majority of people in South Africa are actually middle-class people who making a living. And actually, if you visit townships, it's amazing. Like actually, and don't go to shack settlement only and then tell me everyone's living in poverty. Go to the shack settlement and then go to the place next door and the place next door to that and the place next door to that. And then say to me, actually, what's the majority doing? The majority of people are this middle class, lower and higher middle class sector that is a thriving space. People actually having good lives, facing the same issues everyone else has. And you know, what are their problems? Level of education at the school down the road, getting health care at the government hospital down the road, Eskom, and so on. Is it an economic issue? No, it's not an economic issue. They're addressing that and have addressed that economic issue. They are earning incomes, generating incomes, and investing that back into their businesses, into their homes, into their environment. And that's every time I go to a township, I come back and I'm like, I'm just cannot believe the vibe there, the positivity. I never hear people, these businesses saying, oh, they're complaining about Eskom, just like you and I, and the head of Anglo-American is complaining about Eskom. You know, you could use a mirror image in terms of what they're really complaining about. And this is a hugely positive thing. And then let's look to that and say, how do we build on that? How do we find ways of taking that thing and just like giving it a turbo boost? We give that thing a turbo boost, not the negative thing. We will transform, we'll continue, but we can actually just give it a boost.
Well, we couldn't end off on a better note. Gigi Alcock, thank you so much for taking the time to see us today. We're going to have you back here. This is an ongoing story. Thank you so much.
Thank
to
you.
Everybody who's joined us for the State of the Nation. Please, you know, we'll keep the good news coming, the good and the bad news. But today we've had a great story from Gigi Alcock. I'm Michael Sham. Thank you so much for joining us on the State of the Nation, and we'll see you the next time. Thank you.